All right, so the next film we are reviewing is JOJO Rabbit, which is coming out on, I think it's January 3rd in the UK. It might have previews from New Year's Day, but it'll be out at the start of the month. It's had a festival run. It's directed by Taika Waititi, who is best known for, most recently, Thor Ragnarok, I would say, but he's also kind of well regarded for his irreverent comedy, What We Do in the Shadows, Hunt for the Wilder People. And this is an odd one to summarise, I'm not going to lie. It is set in Nazi Germany during the Second World War, and it follows a young boy, Jojo, who is a member of the Hitler Youth. And he also has an imaginary friend who takes the form of Adolf Hitler. And the imaginary Adolf Hitler is played by Taika Waititi. And we've actually got another Scarlett Johansson performance in this one. She plays Jojo's mother. And basically, the setup and the premise is Jojo is quite the little Nazi. He's very into his role in the Hitler Youth. But he finds that his mother is harbouring a young Jewish girl who's played by Thomasin McKenzie, who has done a lot of very interesting stuff. The thing that I think I saw her most recently in was Leave No Trace, Deborah Granick's really quite superb film from towards the end of 2018. So basically, they strike up a deal whereby, you know, Jojo's going to get in trouble if he knows that she exists and is hiding in their walls, basically. And it's basically the journey of that central, the two children, you know, and obviously there's stuff around the edges to do with Nazi Germany, the Gestapo, and various things, because it's very much pitched as a comedy, but it's going for a satirical angle, and that's basically the setup. Is basically Taika Waititi trying to take this very irreverent brand of humour that he has and applying it to a satire of Nazi Germany and that time period. So that's what it's trying to do. I have my thoughts, but Amanda, I'm interested to see what you made of it. You're the other person here who's seen it.
Oh, you don't want to give your overall thoughts on what you think?
No, I'll wait. I'll wait. I'll wait on the Hitler Youth film. Thank you.
I was going to say the past couple months. I was about to say when you suggested this film. Oh boy, here we go again. You know, The Nightingale was very painful. And for me, comedies about Nazi Germany are some of my least, I find very painful sort of to consider. I love World War II films and I love watching them, but I also love like critiquing and analyzing ones that I don't. And I think there's two comedies that people in this world think are the best, and I hate to, I mean, I love to say that I think are some of the worst I've ever seen, and one is Love Actually. Sorry to be the Grinch here, but I think it's terrible. And the second is Life is Beautiful. And I really sort of expected walking into this to feel the similar things that I felt about Life is Beautiful, where you're setting, and to some extent I do. I think I still feel a bit. I think I had heard something like, "This is the most twee like Nazi film ever made," or something like that. And you know, in some aspects, the audacity to do a comedic film with children that's lighthearted in this setting is a complicated matter. So you have to perhaps give credit for being provocative and trying to create a story behind that. I also know I think Taika Waititi could not find someone to play the Adolf Hitler character, so he ended up having to do it himself. I was impressed that the fact that the characters, similar to like the way people handle it, I think effectively in films like The Producers, the Nazi characters are such complete buffoons and portrayed in a way that allows you to sort of take on the subject matter and sort of understand that this is a story about a young man kind of coming and understanding his own identity in a very, very hard landscape and a very difficult time. And then as well with the performances of Scarlett Johansson, who is really the heroine of the story, a really interesting character, and the understanding of how she navigates that world, not wanting to be a Nazi, but being, fighting for survival. I thought those were effective elements to the film, so I have to give it credit in that way. I know it was very, very popular. I think at the Toronto Film Festival it won. I think it's up for perhaps even an Oscar contender. I'm not sure it went 100% to me. Like, I think there were times where the tone was well thought out, and the script was interesting, and the performances were good. But I think sometimes, it almost made it, and some of the comedic moments. But there were times where I felt perhaps I didn't feel comfortable with them.
So I think in my case, I was never. This probably speaks more to my sense of humor than anything else. I don't think I certainly didn't feel uncomfortable with it at any point. I think there are bits that work better than others. Overall, I liked the film. I enjoyed it. I think I would recommend people go see it. I don't think anybody will be offended by it. Well, I mean, I say that. I'm sure somebody will be, but I don't think it's as prone to offence as the premise's description might imply. The irony is, looking at trailers and the promos for it, it's actually kind of the most notable aspect, which is the bit that doesn't really work for me. I think what works is, as you say, this lampooning of the Nazi characters. In that respect, it's not quite as effective as the work of Armando Iannucci, but that's actually kind of what it reminded me of.
Yeah.
And I think you mentioned to me separately to that something about like the death of Stalin, and it kind of bearing some similarities to that. And to me, like, mine is maybe a slightly more confusing comparison, but it did remind me a little bit of In the Loop and kind of like some of the like bumbling politician characters there. Now, that's not to draw a parallel between the real life instances, of course, but it's the same idea of satirizing individuals in roles of power by making them out to be idiots, effectively. Yeah. And I think that's something which, for me, in the film actually worked really quite well. Sam Rockwell plays kind of like the local Nazi chief, I suppose. He's also like the head of like the local office of Nazis, or something. I can't remember exactly what the role was. His role's quite an interesting one, and I think he plays that very well. Of all the supporting roles, Sam Rockwell's was the most interesting for me. And I think all that stuff works quite well. And it kind of chimes a little bit with what Taika Waititi's comedy is before. So in the same way that that approach to it reminded me of Armando Iannucci's work, some of the stuff that he picks up on and chooses to poke fun at reminded me of What We Do in the Shadows. Taika Waititi's comedy is the comedy of the mundane. Right, It's taking, and stuff that he's done before, he takes fantastical things and then makes it funny by making it as mundane as possible. If you take these fantastical characters or these fantastical ideas, what happens when you give them like just normal bollocks day-to-day stuff, right? And that's the entire premise of What We Do in the Shadows. It's vampires flat sharing. So in that respect, it's still very much within his wheelhouse. And there's one scene where, honestly, I really just found it hilarious. Stephen Merchant has a cameo as the sort of like the head of a local Gestapo unit. And he comes in, and it's this ridiculous thing where there's 8 of them, and they all say Heil Hitler to each other every time they go in and out of a room. It's absurd. It's ridiculous, and it really works extremely, extremely funny, because it's taking this horrific thing and it's then applying an absurdity to it. And those parts for me worked when Taika Waititi stays within what I believe to be his wheelhouse of the comedy of the mundane. The bit that doesn't work for me, or it works far less effectively, is actually ironically the headline instance of the imaginary Hitler friend, right, played by Taika Waititi. And I mean, don't be wrong, there's the odd mild laugh out of it, but I don't really see what he was trying to achieve there. It seems to be, it's a particularly kind of whimsical, irreverent way of delivering exposition as to Jojo's mindset. Because when Jojo's wrestling with this idea of the Jewish girl who he is, beginning to have sympathy for, and it's kind of like breaking down a lot of like the propaganda he's been fed about Jewish people. The way that they vocalize that in the film is effectively him having conversations with the imaginary Hitler. Now, the imaginary Hitler is not particularly satirizing anything about Hitler. There's this one brief moment where he kind of goes into a very Hitler-style, Hitler oratory style, but it's very fleeting. But other than that, I mean, basically, it's Taika Waititi with the German accent, you know, and obviously that's probably a deliberate thing, because what's the point in making it similar to actual Hitler? But you take that one step further, what's the point in that character?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that too. I think that my question is, and I think this goes back to my comment about Life is Beautiful. Can you make a mundane story or a story about like everyday, taking the fantastical and making it everyday and mundane in a topic and a setting in a place that is so rife with confusion and disparity and, utter, chaos and I'm not sure that that's really possible. I think The Death of Stalin does a better job with dealing with that. I also there's these moments to me that the way that it's filmed, and perhaps that's his style, but it also felt a little bit like Wes Anderson's style for sure. And I think if you look at like the Grand Budapest Hotel, there's similar kind of ways in which handle this kind of similar topic. I didn't feel like it matched completely, and so that's the parts I didn't feel comfortable with. I also particularly didn't really like the end. I don't know, there was this moment, and I don't think I'm giving away too much, but there was some sort of like dance moment that felt like super hipster and felt like it should have been in some Noah Baumbach, Greta Gerwig film, from 2012, instead of in a film about the Nazis.
Yeah, I mean, I think and that's the only part where it doesn't. I think it worked better for me, but it's one of those elements where I think for me anyway, it gets away with it, but it's definitely not. It's definitely not in the pro column, because there are elements, particularly there's a segment early on in the film where it's like the Hitler Youth are taken out to train in the woods, and yes, at that point, especially the way certain bits are shot, it is a little bit like Moonrise Kingdom, but what if Nazi youth? It's
totally.
It doesn't quite work for me, but I think when it sticks to that comedy of the mundane, that's when it hits home. And I am going to disagree slightly in that I do think it can be done, because other things have done it, and in a way, I don't know whether this would have been a reference point for Taika Waititi, but something that would have been a useful reference point would be, I'm thinking of the 4th series of Blackadder here in the UK, right? And it's set in the First World War, it's set in the trenches, this horrible situation where, many people died, and, it was just a horrible set of circumstances, but somehow they created an extremely effective comedy out of that, and it's not comedy that just happens to be there, it actually makes comedy out of the scenario in which they find themselves. And I think a lot of the stuff that they deal with in this film, in terms of, the types of propaganda that's getting put out, and the way that the low-level bumbling Nazis go about their day-to-day, a lot of that is very funny, and I think it works very well. It's more just when it just tries to take that little step into the fantastical, and the most obvious example of that is imaginary Hitler, but there are a couple of other elements as well. That's when it loses a bit of effectiveness for me. And it tries to get a couple of emotional moments in, and I think it largely works. I think it largely gets away with it, but it is a slight tonal shift compared to, Sam Rockwell bumbling around drunk in the local office, and, them putting out, ridiculous anti-Jewish propaganda like it's, a information flyer. It does clash with that a little bit. For me, I think it gets away with it. I don't think it will with everyone. Your response to the film is probably going to depend on how much that takes you out of the comedy.
Yeah.
If you find that too jarring, then I can easily see how somebody would react to this, kind of going, nah, this is not for me. For me, it worked, but I think that because it's not blended them maybe as well as it could have, that's where, if somebody is not going to go with the film, that seam, which is very obvious to me, that's where it will fall apart.
All right, and on that note, go see it if you like. Let us know what you think.
The music's very good. I'll say that. That's unambiguously, the music is good. But when you're saying that about this film, that probably says a lot. So, yeah, okay. Out at the start of the month.
Yep.